Is The Red Winter a werewolf novel? In the words of William Shatner, that is what we'll try to find out. It's been a while since I started filming a reading vlog, and I'm actually really looking forward to this one because I am reading The Red Winter by Sullivan, which is one of my more anticipated reads of 2026. Even though there is pollen everywhere outside, it's all in the cars and the streets and the cats, it's technically still winter, and so I have time to read this book. But it's running out, and so I need to get on it. But what is this about? Basically, The Red Winter is a fantastical reimagining of the Beast of Gévaudan incident that happened in the 18th century in France. For those of you who aren't as familiar with werewolf lore, what this was a period where this unidentifiable creature was mutilating and killing livestock and then eventually moved on to people, specifically women and children, I believe. From different eyewitness reports, people were saying that it looked like a wolf, but not quite. Some of them were even saying it looked like a horse in its size, but with features of a wolf. And so over the course of these years that this creature was spotted, there were hunts, many creatures were stalked and killed as a result of it, but we don't actually know if any of them were anything more than wolves. What interests me most about this story, though, is the impact it has had on our common perception of werewolf lore via the silver bullet, because apparently that is what took the creature down in the end. So that's kind of like a brief rundown of what to expect going into this book. But what I'm looking forward to is seeing how the author really transforms that into something else. Because when The Red Winter starts, we are following a man named Sebastian who has actually battled with the beast 20 years previously. But it's back. And so he is returning to Gévaudan to try to take care of some unfinished business. Along the way, I think he's going to reconnect with an ex-lover who also fought the creature with him. And then he's navigating political France. This is around the beginning of the French Revolution, I think. And there's also religious drama going on. Also, there's a demon contract. Sebastian has an indwelling demon. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. I'm going to assume, though, that this is the creature, which, if so, really cool depiction of a werewolf. And that's, ultimately what I guess I'm curious to see is, whether the beast in this is going to be a werewolf or not in our understanding of what werewolf is. Because throughout history and different mythologies, there have been different types of werewolves, different depictions of them. Sometimes they are people who completely lose their human self and turn fully into a wolf. Other times it seems more like it's kind of a mismatch of human and animal parts and awareness. And then other times it's something that is not brought about by a full moon. Sometimes it's an ointment, or it's like a belt that you tie around your waist. I'm not fully sure yet when I'm going to get started on this. I hope it's soon, but I am going to be going to a cabin this weekend for one of my friend's birthday. We're all just getting together and having a nice little time. So I'm going to take this. If the angle has shifted, it's because my tripod nearly fell. But as I was trying to say, I don't know how much of this I'm going to get read this week. Just with work and some other obligations going on. But I am going to a friend's birthday celebration this weekend. We're staying in a cabin, and so I'm going to take this with me. Also, I do have Silent Book Club, so I'll probably be taking this to recommend because, okay, am I the only person who, when I go to something like Silent Book Club, I actually plot what I'm going to read around that for the most impact? I want to impress people, but I also want to read something that I'm enjoying. Is that just me? Am I alone in that? I am looking forward to seeing where this fits in with other werewolf books, because obviously they feature heavily in horror, but they're also in fantasy. And the most recent werewolf book I read was actually The Wolf and His King by Finn Longman, which is a retelling of the Les Bisexual by Marie de France. And it's just medieval queer pining. More even than that, it's about how lycanthropy is something you don't have control over, and in that case is kind of a metaphor for chronic illness and pain, which absolutely butchered me. That's one reason I love the novel, just for that depiction alone and some of the conversations our main dude has regarding his body and the lack of control he has over it. But I don't think this is going to be that. I'm still really excited though. I'm really curious to see like the blend of historical, like the historical record of the actual incident, how that's woven into this fictional narrative, and how the creature is depicted, and then also what the heck is going on with this demon. So I'm about halfway into The Red Winter and thought I would do a check-in to talk a little bit about the story so far, what I think of it, and how this book is fitting into like the larger fictionalized narrative of werewolves, and also if it even does, because that's something Cameron Sullivan has been really aware of so far, and I think is playing with in like a fun tongue-in-cheek way. I 100% had preconceived notions of what this book was going to be based on it being pitched as a retelling of the Beast of Gévaudan. And so far it has been very unlike what I imagined, which has been fun. It took a little while to get used to, but yeah, it's been good so far. We're following Sebastian, who is a professor of some sort, and one night he is approached by this young man who turns out to be his ex-lover Antoine's son. And the son tells Sebastian, 20 years ago you fought this beast in Gévaudan. Well, he's back, and you made a promise to my father and to the people of Gévaudan, you have to kill it. So Sebastian sets out with his indwelling demon Sarmadel, and that's kind of like the general premise for the book. And pretty early on, it goes in directions that, again, I was not expecting. We learn that Sebastian is very much not what he appears, because with his indwelling demon Sarmadel, he has actually lived for centuries. And so far we don't know how Sebastian and Sarmadel came to inhabit one body. We just know that Sebastian is not sure what he is. He's kind of a witch, he's kind of monstrous, kind of human. He's not sure, nobody else is. I don't think there's been anyone or anything like him. And this is kind of throwing off some of the other like supernatural figures in this book. So as the sort of like alchemist witch with a demon tied to him, he's having to really be careful with how he navigates the Roman Catholic Church and also just the political forces that be in Europe at the time, because very easily he could be accused of heresy and witchcraft and, burned at the stake. All of these mythologies and religions are kind of coming together around this figure of the beast, which, no spoilers, but the beast is this Greek Roman god manifesting in France. And we don't entirely know what his purpose is, but it's not as straightforward as just causing death and carnage. And that's where you actually learn that the beast and Sebastian have a prior history that goes back to as far as Joan of Arc. I'm not entirely sure how the Joan of Arc beast narrative is going to feature into like the present day one, but it did get me thinking about the structure of this book in general and how I'm kind of like on the fence about it, honestly. From the very beginning, from the book's foreword, we learn that this is Sebastian writing down the story from our vantage point in the 21st century. So it's kind of like a story within a story within a story, because you have the knowledge that Sebastian is writing this in 2013. Most of it takes place initially, it would seem, in the 1780s. Then we go back in time to the 1760s. And then it goes even further back to the 1400s. And we have these chapters, these addendums that his succubus, Livia, who is contracted to him, is making, talking about the whole Joan of Arc story. On top of that, there are footnotes. Some of these are about like historical things. Some of them are about like arcane mythology and how the magic works. Some of them are just like little cheeky asides. And honestly, it's not my favorite structural choice foretelling this, because at times I find the footnotes a bit distracting, even though I enjoy them typically in novels. I think they can be done really well. Like in The Mars House by Natasha Pulley, I thought they were used to really good effect. But here, I just find them sometimes unnecessary. Sometimes I just feel like it's the author trying to express his political views, which is fine, but I don't know if they have a place in the book. It just seems kind of weird. The pacing has also been strange because of this. So like I'm really almost halfway through, and in the present day section of the 1780s, we still have not even reached Gévaudan. So we don't know what's going on with the beast at this point. We are still very much like getting there. And a lot of this has been Sebastian telling the story to Antoine's son, Jacques. It's definitely setting up for a larger scale conflict with the beast that is slowly like percolating. And via the past chapters in which Sebastian first did battle with the beast, we're getting bits of information that like are kind of influencing the current understanding of what's going on in Gévaudan again. But I just find it's taking a little too long to get there. Of the characters so far, I think Sebastian has been the most well developed, and while none of the other secondary characters are like really pulling me in, I think the cast is solid enough. But the shining character is Sarmadel, the indwelling demon. He's sassy, he's morally gray, he just wants to eat, and I kind of get that sometimes. Sarmadel and Sebastian have this really fascinating relationship where there's no real like way to define what they are to each other because they are so intertwined, but their conversations so far have been like the high point for me. I've loved how snarky they are with one another and how they kind of bring out the best and the worst in each other. Definitely Sarmadel is like trying to get Sebastian to lean into his like darker, baser impulses. The last thing I wanted to kind of talk about is the beast itself and whether it is a werewolf. And so far I would say no. And that's based largely on one of the footnotes where our author, in this case Sebastian, but also Cameron Sullivan, like trying to address this, comments on the fact that the beast is not a werewolf in like our understanding of what werewolf is. In one of the footnotes, Sebastian writes, "Please be aware that the contemporary werewolf with which you are familiar was quite unheard of up to this point, and then suddenly they were everywhere. Perhaps you are beginning to understand why this is such a landmark case." That's definitely true in the world of the Red Winter, but I think it's also true in our own world when it comes to the historical story of the Beast of Gévaudan, because so much of our werewolf lore is tied up in that. That's where you get the silver bullet being something that can kill werewolves, and that's something Sullivan also plays with here, is the reason that like silver is deadly has nothing to do with werewolves being allergic to it. It's just because it holds like arcane symbols better and holds spells better. So, he's constantly subverting our understanding of werewolves. And I think what he is doing with like the idea of werewolf here is interesting because the beast, this god who is manifesting, takes on like human-like, wolf-like features, but at the same time we're aware that Sebastian is seeing one thing and all of the humans are seeing something else entirely. I'm going to be starting chapter 28 today, and hopefully I continue to enjoy this and that it continues to pleasantly surprise me, because I'm looking forward to finally reaching Gévaudan in the 1780s chapters in the present, and seeing how those chapters with the 1760s, the past, kind of like come together, and then also how the whole Joan of Arc fiasco features into this. Finished the Red Winter, and on the last day of winter, I might add, which I think is pretty nifty. Before I get into my thoughts and final impressions of this book, I did want to address the question that I opened with, and that was, is The Red Winter a werewolf novel? I'm going to say no. While there are definitely themes associated with lycanthropy throughout, such as, people not being able to have control over their body and what it does, lapses in memory as a result, no way of knowing what you do during these blackouts, and then also the idea of like a curse. This isn't a true werewolf novel, which I think is refreshing, but also, depending on the expectations you go into this with, which is like me, a little bit of a letdown, because I really did think I was going to be getting a Beast of Gévaudan retelling that was werewolf driven. I'm going to set this down because it's heavy and a bit unwieldy, but my overall thoughts on The Red Winter, I had a good time reading it. I thought it was fun. I really enjoyed the depiction of religion and mythology and how these commingled. I thought the commentary on people using religion, especially Christianity, to persecute others was really apt, because we're seeing the Catholic Church versus more of like what is considered witchcraft, paganry, and all of these other gods who have been wiped out due to the spread of Christianity. I also enjoyed the beast overall motive for manifesting, which we learned later in the book, and not really a spoiler, but it ties into the French Revolution and revolution and war in general, and kind of reminded me of H.G. Pari's A Far Better Thing, which also takes place in France around the time of the Revolution. I do think it's done better there, but I did enjoy the commentary here. Writing-wise, I liked the prose on a sentence level and a lot of the humor that Sullivan incorporates into the book. I did have problems with the structure, which I've already discussed and we'll talk more about, but I appreciated the fact that the chapters were short and that when you were in a moment of high action, I really was entertained and in it. Sebastian as a main character is really interesting because he's this world-weary something. He doesn't know what he is, whether he's technically human, witch, alchemist. He's some amalgamation of all of this, plus demon. And that's a big part of his character, and other characters, honestly, too, is questioning, what am I? What are you? And there's no answer, really, for that, which I did like. I didn't want everything spelled out for me. Despite being so world-weary, we do get a lot of banter between him and Sarmadel, and that, for me, was the most well done and impactful relationship, because you do get the sense that these two have been together for centuries, for so long that they kind of like bleed over into one another. And Sarmadel is interesting because he's a demon inhabiting a human body, so Cameron explores the limitations that he experiences while living in this body that he can't really manipulate and can only do so under certain conditions, which gets kind of into like how he in turn manipulates Sebastian to get what he wants and how they play off each other. It was entertaining. I did like it. I'm glad I read it. But I think because I had such high expectations, like this was one of my most anticipated books of 2026. Ultimately, I was a little let down. And again, that might be my fault for expecting a certain thing. Having now finished this and having already had issues with the structure of Sebastian writing this story down from the vantage point of 2013, I don't think that got any better. In fact, for me, it got worse. Also, and this is an issue I have a lot of times with anything that's epistolary or is like situated as a character writing their story down and then, in this case, annotating it. There is no way that you can remember exactly what happened. You end up becoming an unreliable narrator, but it's not intentional. So I had a hard time really feeling convinced of anything, of the emotions, of the events, of how Sebastian felt about certain individuals, because his bias could have very well been influencing the depictions of them that we got. It's getting hot, but I can't turn the ceiling fan on because it's so loud. For me, as a result of the structure and some of the other stylistic choices that were made, the pacing really did suffer because not a whole lot happens. You spend so much time in the 1780s just trying to get to Gévaudan that when you're actually there, it's kind of like anticlimactic for me. There's so much emphasis on Sebastian and Antoine stalking the beast all throughout the winter months in the 1760s, but we don't really see any of that. Instead, we're focusing more on like those two like getting it on the forest, which, hey, go ahead. But I wanted a little bit more. I wanted more tension and like actual conflict, not even just with the beast, but with the church officials and the other hunters. I think that would have been really interesting and shown more of Sebastian's character. I wasn't super fond of the way that the female characters were depicted because either they kind of just like stick to a certain role and don't ever move beyond that, or they're used for their knowledge and then kind of discarded, which it doesn't read very well. Livia is the main female character, and she is the succubus contracted to Sebastian and forced to kind of do his bidding. She's also the one who is telling the story of Joan of Arc in the 1400s, in these sections called like appendices or addendums. I actually did like the way that those chapters were presented, because the way that you're able to circumnavigate time and tell a story in a streamlined way, it was really compelling. On top of that, you get to see more of Sebastian as this kind of like darker, more tyrannical, more amoral figure, because we are seeing that through Livia's perspective. And for her, he is a tyrant. He is this master that she is forced to obey. So she doesn't have autonomy in that sense. The problem with Livia for me was that she was a succubus and not much else. She kind of never got to go above and beyond her species and the emphasis on sex and desire that comes with that. It's kind of played up for jokes, but it got really stale. And as a result of this, you don't really get to know her as much. I thought she had like the beginning of an interesting relationship with Sebastian, but it never goes anywhere, unfortunately. So while Livia gets, a fair amount of page time just because she's getting to tell her story, all the other female characters are there and gone. Once they serve a purpose, and that purpose is to benefit men, they disappear. I'm not going to say how, but they disappear. One thing I will say that I was personally disappointed about is the romance, because looking at like the back of the book and the way that it is marketed, it's seemingly going to be like this great bittersweet romance between Sebastian and this lover that he left behind in Gévaudan. And I didn't get that. And maybe that was the point. I don't really know, honestly. If you were telling me that finding an item of this person's clothing is enough to make Sebastian decide to write down their entire story together 200 years later, when he hasn't even thought about this person and God knows how long, when this person has remained important to him after all these years, he tells Sarmadel always, when referring to loving them. When the love and the devotion is that long lasting, I need to also fall in love with this person, and that did not happen. Instead, I found the characterization of the love interest kind of basic, kind of just surface level, which got me to wondering if the romance is even the point. And I don't think it is. I think it's more of how that romance made Sebastian feel. He actually makes some of the stupidest choices, in my opinion, that just didn't feel natural to his character, especially if he's supposed to be so long-lived and have done all these like dark, grisly deeds with Sarmadel. And Sarmadel is constantly telling him, hey, you don't need to do this, or you need to do this. Usually it's the latter, like you need to do this now before it comes back to bite you in the butt. And almost every time, Sebastian's just like, I know. But he never does anything. Overall, though, I did have a fun time reading this. I think it would be worth checking out if you are looking to kind of expand your understanding of what werewolf fiction can be. If you're looking for something more historical with like a touch of like grimdark, is that even, I don't even know if I'm using that term correctly. I don't know if I've read grimdark. Anyway, if you're looking for something that's got a bit of a bite to it, has some gore, is kind of gross. All the mentions of plasma, yeah, kind of gross. Love it. So those are my thoughts on The Red Winter. I will probably be passing this along to somebody else, and hopefully they'll enjoy it more than I did. But yeah, all in all, it was a solid read. I'm glad I read it. And here's to hoping that my other anticipated books of 2026 prove a bit more compelling.